Consistency has been an issue for the Louisville Cardinals throughout the first 3 weeks of this young football season. We'll talk about just how concerned you should be on today's episode of the Locked On the Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Happy Monday. Welcome into another episode of the Locked On the Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This episode brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. Joining me on his weekly appearance, wasn't on last week due to scheduling issues, but he's back this week discussing another Cardinals victory. Grant Mulligan, State of Louisville football analyst. Brother, how's it going?
Glad to be 3-0.
We love to hear that. 3-0 for the first time since Lamar Jackson's Heisman season in 2016. We're going to talk about consistency on today's episode of the show. That is the main thing to focus on. How can the offense improve? The offense has been really, really good. We're going to talk about how much they can improve. We'll talk about the second half struggles more in depth in that matchup against Indiana. And then we'll talk about overall just how concerned should you be with the inconsistency for Louisville. Grant, I want to talk about a couple of statistics that I've seen. And this is something that I think obviously if you're a Louisville fan, you absolutely love to see this. I'm sure you probably saw the tweet as well. It's from @TheBestWager on Twitter. Louisville ranks 7th in yards per play, 4th in EPA per play, which is essentially like expected points average, 3rd in available yards, garbage time filtered out. So that essentially takes the amount of yardage in drives. And all that combines for the most efficient offense in the country for a first-year head coach. Kind of goes to show you just how good the Louisville offense is. This past week sort of hindered the overall statistical average of points per game. Louisville still just outside of the top 30. When we talk about how much the offense can improve, Grant, are we sort of like really criticizing down to the molecule here? Are we micromanaging the offense here by suggesting that they can improve, or does it just kind of come with the territory for Louisville trying to reach that next level?
Of course, there's always going to be areas you can improve. Even for a number one offense in the country, there's always going to be things that you can clean up. So I don't ever want us to get into the place, especially so early on, to think that we're great. There's no improvements to be made. We've already arrived. The truth is that we're still, like you said, we're still a first-year head coach. We've still got a lot of players learning a new offense. But that is very promising that it's been so efficient so early, which really goes to speak to coaching, getting players prepared, completely new offense, running pretty much exactly how it needs to, how it's designed to function. The improvement area has been a talking point for a lot of people across the board. In my opinion, is quarterback play. I mean, you look across the board in different areas of the offense. You've got receivers who are getting separation. Jamari Thrash is the best receiver in the ACC right now, and that's not even an exaggeration. He's incredible to watch week in, week out. Yep. And it's more than just him. Kevin Coleman's legit. Yeah, Amari Huggins-Bruce is good whenever he gets his opportunity. Like you've got a deep group of guys you can go to. Offensive line's as good as we've seen it in about a decade. Really, really solid play, both pass blocking and run blocking. We have a really solid 3-back rotation, each guy bringing something a little different, led by Jawar Jordan, who is one of the most efficient in yards per carry in the country. But when you get down to it, the same thing we've been saying since game one, and hopefully he can continue to iron out some of these issues. But Jack Plummer is where I truly believe we're being held back offensively. And we'll talk about consistency more towards the end because he has flashes of being really good. Like in the Murray State game, when he threw that dart, hit Jamari Thrash in stride for the slant route for him to be able to break free for a long touchdown. But then there's also times he's just missing guys. And like there was a play where Jamari Thrash had to take 4 slow steps to wait to the ball to catch up to him. Luckily, he had burned the defender so bad it didn't matter. But if you put that more on, like that's a touchdown with nobody in the frame.
That's a touchdown.
So I'm concerned that the things I was worried about week 1 with Plummer are still happening. This is getting into the territory of, okay, this might be who he is. And if this is the final product of Jack Plummer, I worry about what the ceiling is for this team.
Yeah, I mean, granted, he's done enough for this team to win games. And, you have to accept that and acknowledge it. But I think if you even asked Jack, he would probably tell you that, these haven't been my best performances. I mean, you can look at week 1, chalk it up as rust, hasn't played in X amount of months. It is what it is. I thought he made some better passes like that strike in Murray State, but I mean, it's Murray State. Let's be honest. No disrespect to the Racers, but not necessarily the best opposition. Then you come to an Indiana team that I think that their defense was better than people gave it credit for. I don't think that defense is the only reason that Ohio State scored 23 points, but I also think that you can't just say it was bad quarterback play for the Buckeyes either, especially in the second half when you saw how Tom Allen made some adjustments and dialed up that pressure. Indiana's defense can definitely throw a wrench in some plans, but for me, it's the hesitation on the reads, because something that we talked about early on in week 1, leading up now into week 3, now post week 3, is I want to see more cohesiveness between the quarterback and the receivers to where the ball is getting there at the break of the routes rather than after the receiver has been open for a while. There's that whole saying of being able to throw a guy open. I mean, I don't necessarily think that Plummer has to do too much in terms of throwing guys open because of how good this receiving core is, but he has to trust his reads a little bit more. I don't think it's the final product. I hope it's not. I don't think it is. From the people that I've talked to, Plummer has gotten better. When he's played, he's gotten better throughout the season. So hopefully that continues to get to where we need it to be. But I mean, I think that Plummer has shown strides. Like, I think he looked better against Indiana than he did Georgia Tech. And that's good in itself in a vacuum, but Boston College is an interesting game. I think that Louisville wins that game, but after Boston College, it's where you need Plummer to be very good, because you have NC State on the road, who is a very good defensive team. You have Notre Dame on the road, or at home, I'm sorry. They're still pretty solid defensively. And then you have Pittsburgh with Pat Narduzzi and Duke with Mike Elko. 4 defenses that are really going to try to throw some different stuff at you, and you have to be on top of your game. So I think that we're starting to enter that territory of, okay, there's a lot of urgency now heading into week 4, because you want to see him continue to get better and better. And I think it's confidence. I think he can make these throws. You've seen that he can throw it downfield. I've seen him make some great throws on the run. Another aspect, Grant, for me, is that I feel like he's not staying in the pocket when that pressure comes. Maybe that's just me being, over analytical, but I feel like when any sort of pressure comes, he sort of is very quick to scramble, which is okay because he can throw on the run, but also feels like that leads to a little bit of indecision as well.
And I think you've got the right word there, is indecision in general, because Plummer bailing on pressure wasn't really something that I was too concerned with whenever he was coming in from Cal or when he was coming in from Purdue. So it feels more mental than anything. Obviously, at this point in his career, we're not going to get really much more physically. I mean, we got run game out of him, and he's like a sneaky good running quarterback. He catches defenses off guard with, and he can chunk off 10 yards for us. But he needs to be able to process these reads faster. When you get that pressure, instead of bailing out, find your check down, find your second read, your third read. And in those situations, you're on balance. You're able to drive the ball, make the throw. I'm wondering if it's the newness with the receivers. One thing that I do want to say to his credit, though, and something that I'm looking forward to in the coming weeks, is that Plummer elevated his play a lot against better teams when he was at Cal. His game against USC was one of the biggest games, one of the best games that he had in his career. And we saw that against ranked teams. He actually has elevated his play. So I'm hoping that this is a trend that continues, because when we go on the road to NC State, when we get Notre Dame at home, that's the kind of game we're going to need out of him. And he's shown that he's capable of it in big moments. So I don't really want to get overcritical of Plummer for games. I want to point out where there's deficiencies, which we had talked about.
Yeah, you have to.
The reads are too slow. That's just an objective fact. I think Plummer would tell you the same thing. But I still think that from what we had discussed actually many, many, many months ago when Plummer first committed, there's still a lot that we talked about to be excited about that we still haven't seen yet.
Yeah, so I think it's going to come. I do think it's going to come. And it will. And that's why I don't think it's time to hit the panic button yet. It's time to talk about it, but it's not time to, open and hit the panic button. But we will talk about some of those second half struggles, both offensively and defensively, more in depth here in just a moment after we talk about our friends over at BetterHelp. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Everybody goes through a time in their life where racing thoughts keep you up at night, waking you up early, or preventing you from being able to essentially enjoy life. Unfortunately, life happens. It gets tough, and sometimes you need some external help. A lot of people, hear the word therapy and it brings back a bad connotation. But if you benefited from therapy, you know that a lot of times it can help, whether or not you've been in it personally. I think that it's something that you may know someone that has benefited from it. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Get a break from your thoughts with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnCollege today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnCollege. Okay, heading on into the second segment of this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. With me, my good friend, State of Louisville football analyst, Grant Mulligan. We're taking a step back from looking at the offense from a specific lens and now looking at the whole team as it pertains to that second half. Louisville goes into halftime up 21-0 with the kickoff going their way in the second half. Indiana goes with an onside kick, and Louisville just seemingly never was able to find their footing in that second half. Some of that you have to give credit to Tom Allen and the Hoosiers for making those adjustments. But second half struggles, Grant, what were the main – let's start offensively. What were the main issues, in your opinion, for this Louisville team offensively in the second half against Indiana?
Yeah, from an offensive perspective, it's something that we had kind of touched on already, is that he dialed in the pressure and it didn't feel like Plummer responded well to that, nor did the play calling reflect attacking that. I feel like we had a really great offensive explosion in the first half, and that was something that was necessary to bring with you to the second half. It was almost like we felt like we were so much in the same gear that we didn't feel like we needed to change up much. So when they adjusted to the game plan, we didn't really adjust our game plan a whole lot. And when they started bringing pressure, changing pressure packages, we were still going for those same kind of plays, which obviously gashed them in the first half. But getting into the second half, and they had already keyed into it. Luckily, they were able to make plays late to kill the clock. One thing that I really like about this team, and I know we're talking about struggles right now, but both the players and the coaches have done a really good job finishing out games. Yeah, they may have opened the door a little for Indiana, but whenever it really mattered, we got the rushing yard, we got the first down to kill the clock, to close the game out. So we don't lose the mental there. We don't lose the mental battle. We don't fall flat. But, it's a pretty stark difference going from that huge first half when we felt like we could get anything to a second half where it was just punt after punt after punt. We couldn't seem to get anything going. So I think falling out of rhythm and we just didn't dial up enough plays to get us back in rhythm. It feels like we were trying to get back to the first half rather than trying to find what rhythm works with what they're throwing us at the second half.
That's fair. And looking at the Louisville possessions outside of the first half, Louisville had a 5-play, 13-yard drive. That was their first drive of the second half. Then they threw the interception, which arguably Plummer could have ran it and got the first down, but he ends up going deep. Kevin Coleman Jr. should have caught the football, but
hit him in the chest. Should have caught it.
Yeah, I mean, granted, it wasn't double coverage, but should have caught the football. After that, 20 yards and a punt, 18 yards and a punt, and then the final possession of the game. So not much going offensively there. Defensively speaking, it felt like what Louisville was doing in the first half. Indiana saw that, made some adjustments, continued to find Jalen Lucas, which he scored in that second half. It felt like Louisville just really never had an answer. Now, granted, thankfully, the play call on 4th and goal from the half-yard line was one in which it allowed Louisville to make a big play. Shout out to TJ Quinn and the Cardinals defense. But Indiana moved the ball very, very well in that second half, and it's got to, at least highlight some concern.
Yeah, I think our biggest problem, and this has been kind of an issue throughout all 3 games, is that despite the talent we have on the front, I don't think we're getting enough pressure, and we're not converting enough of that pressure into sacks. Ashton Gelati, great player. I don't want to rag on him because I know what he's capable of. I know he's the leader of the defense, but there are multiple times in which he's getting pressure to the quarterback and he's missing the sack in the backfield. We're
I feel like a lot of people were slipping in that game. Did you see that? Like a lot of people were just slipping on that turf.
I saw that as well, but
we're in a Gelati slipped like 5 or 6 times, and I'm like, oh man, if he doesn't slip, that's a sack. And it felt
that's what I saw as well. Like there were so many missed opportunities to create negative play to get their offense off schedule, but we defensively allowed them to get in a really good rhythm. We didn't have that many disruptive plays. We weren't getting enough pressure. We weren't turning the pressure into sacks and negative plays, and it was just too easy to remain in rhythm for them to start building momentum against us because we didn't do enough to make them uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I definitely agree there. And I think that ultimately, I mean, don't get me wrong, on this episode, you can say, well, you all aren't talking about the great things that Louisville did. There are positives to take away from this performance, and throughout the entirety of the show this week, we're going to talk about those positives. But we're also going to talk about the areas of improvement because you're doing yourself, your fan base, and your team a disservice because if you are a finished product in week 3, something's wrong. And you have to continue to get better and better as the season goes along. And I think it's important to talk about where those areas are that you need to get better. But in the next segment, we're going to sort of wrap it all up and talk about it from an overall sense as to whether or not fans should be concerned with the inconsistency Louisville has shown through the first 3 weeks of the season. We'll talk about that question here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at Athletic Brewing. Now time for your game changer of the week, brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. Much like how Jamari Thrash was the game changer for the Cardinals, Athletic Brewing has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. As I mentioned on past episodes, they brew over 50 styles of craft non-alcoholic beer, including IPAs, Goldens, sours, and more. My favorite, especially for this time of the year, is the Oktoberfest, which is fantastic. They're great tasting and award-winning, fit for all times, whether it's watching a game, tackling work, working out, etc. There's no hangovers. There's no feeling bad at the end of the day. Overall, you can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use the promo code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first order. That's LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. Final segment of the show with my good friend, weekly guest on to the Locked On Louisville podcast, Grant Mulligan, football analyst for the State of Louisville.com. Grant, we talked about the offense, talked about the second half struggles. Consistency was an issue week 1. Week 2, we're putting that off to the side for now. I mean, it is what it is. Week 3, consistency was even more of a stark issue. You mentioned the adjective stark. I think that is very, very on point here because it was a tale of two halves. It was a Jekyll and Hyde situation for Louisville. We're a quarter of the way through the regular season. Cardinals are 3-0. Better than what they said they could have been since 2016. Are you concerned with the lasting effects of this inconsistency on the field, or is it something that you expect this team to be able to fight through as the season goes along?
There are two possible outcomes to this, in essence.
And they're both at the very end of the spectrum.
They're both at the very end of the spectrum. One possibility is that this is who this team is. We're inconsistent, and 3-0 isn't going to last forever. Eventually, lack of consistency will kill you. You'll lose games because of it. And a lot of that is because of a new coaching staff, complete changeover, complete defensive scheme change, complete offensive scheme change. Mm-hmm. And it really, as much as the players have done a really good job in learning and adjusting, there's growing pains in it. And that's one of the things that I think will get ironed out. On the other end of the spectrum is that we're winning despite inconsistency, and every week we get closer to being able to put an entire game together. And that, Louisville, is terrifying because we're winning games and closing out games despite being marred with inconsistent moments, being inconsistent with quarterback play. Jack Plummer not yet showing he's been able to put together a whole game of solid, consistent production. Defense not being able to generate consistent pressure. But the lack of consistency is almost just as much exciting as it is concerning, because it feels like with this team built up of so many transfers and combined with new players and a completely new scheme for both sides of the ball, is that the more this team plays together, the more this team plays in the system, the more cohesive, in theory, they should be able to be.
Right.
And coming out 3-0 while still working through issues of not being able to put an entire consistent game together is really exciting.
Oh, yeah.
It's something to think about. It's something to weigh whenever you're thinking, because we're not just 3-0. We had to fight game 1, game 3 to get to this point.
You're a couple plays away from potentially being 1-2, hypothetically. Now, hypothetical games are very dangerous because at the end of the day, hypotheticals are just that. Exactly. They're mental exercises because the team still is 3-0, but it hasn't been 3 blowouts. You're right.
Exactly. Well, it's been 1 blowout, but sorry, Murray State.
Anyways, consecutive blowouts.
One thing, and I touched on this earlier, that makes me less concerned about inconsistency is how good this team and this staff has been at closing out games. We've gotten the yards when we needed it. We've gotten the stops that needed it. This is clearly a point of emphasis for the coaching staff to not let a lead slip through your fingers, or how to gain a lead back whenever the pressure is high. This team handles pressure and handles adversity remarkably well for a team that is so heavily made up of transfers, that is so new on an offensive and defensive scheme perspective. So I'm currently leaning more towards this team can be really scary when we finally put it all together, because one of the biggest marks of an inconsistent team, Los Angeles Chargers, is that they fail at the end. Okay? You can put together some really high moments.
Why do you have to do this?
I'm sorry. Well, it speaks to us and it speaks to the fans, man. That's what that looks like when you're inconsistent in a bad way. This, to me, speaks more to inexperience within the scheme and experience with each other, but still well coached enough to close. Closing is huge in the sport, they've shown it. 2 out of the 3 weeks, they didn't have to show it week 2, but they legitimately had closeout moments in both of those games, and they were successful. It's going to be much harder when we go on the road and go up against
A
NC State.
legitimate road game.
A legitimate road game. It's going to be harder when Notre Dame comes here. But if these were not slipping when it would be so easy to do so, we're finishing.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me very excited. I'm really looking forward to seeing what this team looks like when we can put a whole game together. There's still a possibility it goes the other way. There should still be something in the back of fans' mind that, hey, we haven't put this all together yet. But there should also be something exciting in fans' mind. Hey, we haven't put this all together yet.
Right.
So it exists on a spectrum. Long-winded way of saying that. I'm more on the optimist side. The staff seems to have them going in a great direction. We have a lot of talented players. They'll gel the more they play together. I feel really good about where we're at. Very happy to be 3-0. Got to keep our eyes on it, but I have high hopes. Need to dial up more pressure. Need to convert pressure to sacks. That's my biggest concern about consistency.
I agree there. I'm siding on the optimistic portion of the argument. I think that it's way too early to be truly concerned. If we're halfway through the season and we're still having these issues, let's talk about it. But at this point, I've seen people really say, I saw somewhere, it's crazy. I forget, I think it was on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, where someone after the game, literally 5 minutes after the game, tweeted out that Louisville was going to go 7-5 because of the inconsistency. And I'm like, relax a little bit. I mean, I understand some of the concern, but it's week 3 and you also can't discount. Look what last year's team did, 1-2 and absolutely turned the season around. 3-0 now, and you can get better and better and better. So I'm going to err on the optimistic side like Grant. So not too awful concerned at this point in time, but also you would have to be extremely ignorant to suggest that everything is just absolutely okay, because you do still have to get better and better. But you can't really fault how Louisville started out at 3-0. So, but that's going to wrap up this episode with Grant Mulligan. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here coming up soon.